Hello, this is Mark, and this is a video to try to explain UCC history, and that's a 700 years of history. So obviously, to make it fit in a video, I'll stick to major highlights. Okay, one, what is UCC? It's Universal Commercial Code. It was established by the Holy Roman Empire back in about 1302, somewhere around there. The exact dates of everything I'm quoting are somewhere around there. Basically, don't get caught by minutia of a month, a day, or a year in this kind of presentation. But basically, around 1302, the UCC was formed. And that was done through the Holy Roman Empire to drive through the world the Roman conquest agenda for the world. It regulated all commerce between countries. It regulated shipping rules. It regulated maritime law. It instituted canon law as the institution of how everything would be done from Europe. And in order to do this, the church made a huge concession. They were able to get the full endorsement of all the royalties of all of Europe and the Arab countries involved, because at the core, the lawyers and the barristers and the government people, the public officials, had to swear to the sovereign's interest. Okay? That got the kings, queens, and everyone in line. And it also built the foundation for conflict. Okay? Now, UCC ruled the land, and it's worth noting that shortly after the UCC was formed, well, within a generation, shortly after, a pope, through the King of France, did the slaughter of the Knights Templar. I guess the Knights Templar weren't planning or wanted to craft and obstruct the UCC. But that's a sidebar, okay? But it is pertinent in history, okay? Very pertinent in history, okay? So basically, the foundation of the UCC was to serve the sovereign's interest of all individual countries, and they swore their allegiance to the Pope. And this way, the conquest of the world was done. Okay, it was the foundation of how Europe would take on the Americas, which by that time hadn't been discovered. They'd known about by ancient maps, but they really hadn't been discovered. Africa was there for the taking. India, they'd known about and was there for the taking because the technology was there. And UCC allowed the groundwork to do this. Okay? Now, in 1559, that was the real first challenge to the UCC that I can see as pertinent, other than the slaughter of the Knights Templar, which happened between this time. Okay? Now, that was a Friday the 13th curse thing. And the legends of why Friday the 13th is really bad is because they killed all lawyers, which is something that Shakespeare said they should do in around 1559, because Shakespeare was around in 1559 when England separated from the Pope. Or actually, that happened in 1538. Again, let's not get confused. So King Henry VIII separated from the Pope. And the underlying issue there was not that the Pope wanted to divorce his wife because she couldn't bear sons. It was the Pope wanted the deeds to the lands that King Henry VIII was sticking his stake in and saying, "This is England's territory under King Henry VIII. Now, other sailors like the people from France and Spain. They went and they put the stake in for their country, their king, and then when they brought the stake over, they would ceremoniously give it to the Pope. Okay? King Henry VIII refused to do that, and he'd staked more land than all the others combined. Okay? So, by divorcing from there in 1538, when he separated, he made the Church of England. And again, at that time, they made sure that King Henry VIII was under UCC rulings and regulations. And being under the sovereign's interest, he was a ruler over and above all the laws and rules and regulations. He was above the law. Okay? The king, just like the Pope, was above the law, and it nurtured conflict, okay, which is what it's all about. Control the conflict and have a solution already there, and you steer history. Well, these guys are great at it. And the UCC is a prime example of it. Now, basically, colonial rule you can't blame it on England being colonial rule, although in Canada and the United States and Australia, they had English-style colonial rule. Colonial rule came from UCC in 1302. Okay? All countries of Europe behaved under UCC rules, which gave them the sovereign's interest. And under the sovereign's interest of driving God and Jesus and all these Western values down their throat, everything that was done to these savages, these people less than human, because they weren't Christian, was allowed under UCC ruling. Okay? Now, in 1538, King Henry VIII did this abdication. And what's really important is the following year, in 1539, is the year where he made all the great charters, like the Hudson's Bay Charter and the India Tea Company Charter, and all of these great charters. And they were all given more than corporations. They were greater than corporations. And they were cast in 1538. And they were the solution to King Henry not having given them to the Pope. He created everything that's pink in the empire, okay, by having separated in 1538 and then giving these charters the rights over this. And some very high influential people got these charters. And the Rothschilds ended up with full control of it after Waterloo, but that's we'll get into that. That's later, okay? Now, so in 1559, from 1558 or 1538 to 1559, it was bloody revolution in England, okay? Because it was no longer it was under King Henry VIII despot rule or one of his daughters, okay? Because he never had sons, okay? And in 1559, Queen Elizabeth I got in there, and she did the active supremacy of God. Okay, and she said the sovereign was no longer supreme. Okay, God was supreme, and even the Queen was under God and therefore had to follow the law of the land. And that had a major impact on the UCC and society as a whole. Okay? That's where the expression, no one is above the law, came in. Okay? And it was going back to a human covenant where God, that with Abraham, which is a Galatians 3. I'm saying in 1559, Galatians 3's prophecy of returning to Abraham's trust was tried by Queen Elizabeth I. by saying the supremacy of God and even the Queen was not above the law. Okay? And the expression, no one is above the law, came from that, and it spawned a whole, what ended up to be another 150 years of bloodbath. Okay? And this is because in 1561, okay, 3 years after this Act of Supremacy came in, this Parliament passed a decree saying that was the supremacy of Parliament. Okay? And what they imposed there is that we, the body of Parliament, have authority over the Queen. The Queen is the Queen is under the law, and Parliament upholds by the people, for the people. Therefore, it has authority and overrides over the Queen. And this was done through the Act of Supremacy of Parliament of 1561. And what happened there was, in law and in essence, this body called Parliament and this body called the banksters were in collusion with each other. And they said that as a governing body, they were above the law. No one above the law. The Queen is a one. Okay, well, she calls herself a we to get around that same loophole. Okay, but the body called Parliament and the body called the banksters were above the law because they represented everyone. Okay, now I'm saying that there lies the foundation for 150 years of conflict. It's when Shakespeare said, kill all lawyers and politicians, because it worked for 120 years before on the Friday the 13th, okay? But he was sincere about it, because basically what happened there is another bloodbath that lasted for 150 years, okay? The Cromwells and everybody else came in and said, oh, we're bodies above the law, and behaved like assholes and caused the bloodbath, okay? Now, because the form was perverted. Now, basically, I'm saying that fundamental flaw of what everyone thinks is no one is above the law, which is the norm and the giant step forward that happened in 1559. And that can be fixed to return to its original intent by changing what's under respondent superior, which is the UCC, because it says there, no one is above the law, double brackets. Now, under respondent superior, if you went, nobody is above the law, then these bodies called the banks, and these bodies called governments, and these bodies called corporations would not be above the law. The law would be supreme over everyone and everybody, because all these people who call themselves a body are not considered a one. And that's perversion of the law. Okay, it's total perversion of the law. And it's what causes the strife. And they've steered history around this, okay? Now, keep the story moving on the UCC. Around 1712, a guy called John Locke, because of the fact that slavery there were more white slaves than there were Negro slaves. And basically, they were like trying to say that white slaves had to start being sold off at the price of Negro slaves. And that really pissed off the locals, okay? Because basically, real estate didn't exist until slavery was abolished in 1712. Okay? Prior to that, to get a loan, you put up your daughter or your sons as collateral to pay off the loan in servitude to a master, who would work off their wages and give them a subsistence living allowance, but actually would work off the wage. After slavery was abolished, real estate was introduced because they couldn't take your sons and daughters anymore to back the value of money. They had to take land, which was the next most precious thing people had. So basically, if you foreclosed on a mortgage or a loan, they would come and take your land because they couldn't take your children as collateral. Now, that was a monumental thing done in 1712, and it instituted the principles of fundamental justice and established the rules of what constitutes tyranny. Okay, in what he wrote as the two treaties of government. And this, John Locke was brilliant, okay, a phenomenally brilliant lawyer. And in the two treaties of government, it's a long read. Oh, painful, but very enlightening read, okay? It used to be mandatory reading for lawyers, probably still is. But in there, he outlined and set up the fact that the United States would be a nation who has no understanding, and Canada would be a people to the north who were not a nation. And that was to express the Romans' prophecy. And legal scholars will point out that he did his best to steer prophecy of Romans to happen through his implementation of the principles of fundamental justice. Now, he abolished slavery throughout the land, but obviously there was an exemption as a body for the United States because they kept on doing slavery till 1860s. And that's 150 years of somehow America being able to get around the slavery laws that were for everywhere else in the Commonwealth. And that is a subject that hardly nobody ever talks about. How did America, while being a Commonwealth nation, fully operate with slavery when John Locke had abolished slavery? Which brings up the entire lawlessness nature of the English Empire at the time. The reality is the biggest port of call of the Commonwealth was in Jamaica, and that was entirely operated under pirates, okay? It's where pirates could come in, share the booty with the Queen, have safe harbor and restock and everything, go out and plunder the Spanish, the Portuguese, and whatever ships they had out there, and then they were robbing. And the number one income, it's well documented that in the 1700s and 1600s and into the 1800s, the number one income for the Queen was her pirates, which were called privateers. Okay? So the English Empire has a phenomenal history of being thieves, robbers, doing everything with the might, okay? Now, under might. Now, basically, it comes into like 1776, okay? The next major event that happened to the UCC and how things ruled in the world is 1776, when the United States separated from England. Okay, that was a monumental event, and it's also the same year that the Illuminati passed in an Adam Weishaupt maxim of serving the creation. Okay, and I wrote extensively. I'll have to post it on the side. It was introduced in 1776, at the same year that the United States was formed, at the same year that the Illuminati successfully implanted into the UCC the maxim of serving the creation, which is the exact opposite of serving the Creator. But it was a way around having fallen back to serving where the sovereign was supreme and above the law, which was they tried to get out of it in 1559. It was smashed in 1561. It resulted in anarchy and turmoil and just the rape of all of the conquest of everything. And they went to a maxim of going to serving the creation, which is the exact embodiment of evil, which is what Adam Weishaupt pointed out when he had this great idea that it was extremely wicked and it had a noble twist to it. And the reality is, I refuse to believe that he did not know that the solution back then was to serve the Creator. Okay, which is what the UCC Public Trust Channel is now upholding. And I'm saying in 1776, the solution to changing the maxim of how business operates to serving and how the law operates and how a maximum of law of serving the creation was introduced, and it was the embodiment of evil. Okay, the onslaught of the West, the onslaught of South America, the onslaughts that happened in India and in China and all over the world could not have happened without serving the creation. And lawyers, all of this time, were serving the sovereign's interest. Okay? That was still a cornerstone, but it was removed. With the Act of Supremacy, it was removed from being with the kings and queens, and it was placed with the banksters. And proof that it was moved with the banksters is in the United States during the conquest of Go West, Young Man, Go West, and or a Horace Greeley thing, is the banks paid you $50 for the scalp of a native, and they paid you X number of dollars for the horns of a buffalo, because the banksters were actually paying people to destroy the livelihood and kill natives because they weren't really human beings under the UCC. And America had this exemption somehow from the UCC, and I'm saying that's because they were a body, even from the beginning. And that's through the Hudson's Bay Company and just corruption.